I'm glad I never did a felon or a misdemeanor where I would be under the lights. But you know, in reference to what I just said, I would say the greatest fear someone like I have is to be incarcerated. Think about it, to be incarcerated. That'll keep you in the straight and narrow. I know we're not interviewing yet. I should save it. At least I make you laugh. My name is Arnold Newfield. I was born February 27th, 1942 in Westerbork, Holland.
I don't even know if this question will apply to you, to describe your life before the Holocaust.
Okay, next. There aren't going to be too many people you can ask that question of anyway, so.
Yeah, it's true. But maybe you could.
I'll tell you my parents.
Yeah, like what family life was like, what they were
I'll
doing.
tell you my parents. My oldest brother was born July 1934. My other brother was born June 38. After Kristallnacht, my father was a corn and barley on the, not stock, on the market, you know, selling that wholesale oil. And he was doing very well. My parents had 2 live-in maids, and my father enjoyed going to the coffee shops, playing cards, and just talking to other men. But after Kristallnacht, my mother said, "Amen, it is time for us to leave." And my father took my oldest brother, Bernard, to Holland. My mother followed him with my brother Marcel several months later. And they entered Holland, and the Dutch, being such a small country as it is, you know, they centralized all the refugee Jews to Westerbork. And when the Germans entered the lowlands, they had the refugee Jews in central location, which was Westerbork. So they utilized Westerbork as a transportation camp where they transported the Western Jews through Westerbork eastward. When they ran out of Western Jews and Dutch Jews, they cannibalized the Jews in Westerbork. So in March 44, my brothers and I and my mother went to a place called Ravensbrück in north central Germany. And my father went to Buchenwald. When my parents were split, they made a pact that after the war, they would meet back in Holland. And we were shipped from Ravensbrück to Bergen-Belsen, March 1945. And we were liberated from Bergen-Belsen April 15th, 1945. My mother had spinal meningitis at the time the British entered the camp. And my mother told my brothers, "Do not eat the food from the soldiers." I don't know how she knew that, but she just told them, "Don't eat the food from the soldiers." Half the population of Bergen-Belsen died when the British entered Bergen-Belsen. Number one, some of them ran towards the British troops and the Germans were still up in the towers and they shot them. And the soldiers, meaning well, gave them hard food like chocolate, whatever they had. And their stomachs could not tolerate it. And the British kitchen did not enter Bergen-Belsen until the following day. And they started making, palatable food such as soup or whatever it was. But my mother, she really was truly unbelievable. But an interesting story related to that, my brother, who was 11, was on a transport going to Palestine. My other brother, who was 7, because my father was Hungarian, he told him he was Hungarian. He was on a transport going to Hungary. My mother's half-sister's husband was an intelligence officer in the U.S. Army. He attached himself to the British looking for us. When he entered Bergen-Belsen, he asked for Neufelds, which was our name, not Newfield at the time. And he was told, well, Neufeld has 2 kids, he asked for Neufeld with 2 children, because they didn't know I existed. So he was told, well, we know a Neufeld who has 3 children. So he found my oldest brother, and my oldest brother did not want to talk to him because he wore a uniform. So he spoke to my brother in German. My brother spoke German, and my brother would not talk to him. He explained to my brother that he was his uncle. So finally, Bernard, went with him, found my brother Marcel, and they all went to the infirmary where my mother and I were. And Fred tried to convince my mother who he was, because she had never met him. It was her half-sister's husband. And he showed her a picture. Oh, he said, I am your sister's husband. So he showed her a picture of my Aunt Edith. So my mother says, that's not Lily. So then she realized it was her half-sister Edith. And he did help us. I never asked my parents how they met back in Holland, how we got back to Holland. Stupid. Where the hell was my brains? How come I never asked these questions? Just took everything for granted. And if you speak to any survivor, or they didn't ask the questions either. My father never spoke about his experience in Buchenwald, ever. And we had family in America, so maybe that's how my parents got together. They each wrote to America. I'm not sure how they did it, but after the war, we lived in Holland. In fact, I have a wonderful picture of my family, October 1945. I guess that's when they got together in Holland, or maybe the month before that. And on my 50th anniversary being in the United States, my nephews and my children and my stepchildren got me a plaque with that picture, celebrating my 50 years in America. I think I answered your question.
Yeah, definitely.
I do.
That's beautiful.
I do.
What was your first memory that you can remember? 'Cause I'm sure
I
there's-
remember being in Holland in the backyard. We lived with bookbinders, Protestant bookbinders, in the back of their house. Their name were Heller. And I remember my mother leaving to go to Belgium to visit my father's brother, her youngest brother. And I remember having the mumps at the time. Another thing I remember is we had a cat, and I remember seeing a dead mouse. I remember that. And I certainly remember the day I arrived in America.
Absolutely.
I wore the same pea jacket my two older brothers had. And meeting my grandfather. And my mother's family and my father's brother. They were all there at the ship when we arrived.
When did they immigrate?
My aunt, my uncle, I think arrived in America right after the Nazis, but before the war really broke out. My grandfather was in Cuba till he was allowed into the United States. And my father's brother got to Holland, and then he got to America around 43. They all managed to get out. And for whatever reason, we couldn't, or we didn't, or maybe because we went to Holland, you could. And Holland was overrun in 1940? I don't know.
So how old were you when you got here?
When I came here, a little over 5.
So do you think you feel emotional because you're remembering the emotion of your parents when you arrived? Or do you remember feeling emotional on arriving here?
Oh, that's a good question. My mother was never the emotional type. And I don't think my father wasn't that emotional either. It was just, I guess it was the euphoria of knowing you're in America and meeting your family for the first time, especially my grandfather. He's the only grandparent I ever had. And I called him Opa. And when I was asked, what do you want your grandchildren to call you? I said, Opa. And that's what they call me.
Was there any family that was still behind?
No. Well, I'm named after my father's father who perished under the Nazis like in 1939, 1940. My cousin who was born here and I were named after the same grandfather. She and I.
Did you ever go back to Holland?
Yes, on my honeymoon with my second wife, 1984.
Did it match your memories at all? What was it like being back there? Was it happy?
It was good. It was a good. Austria was a disaster for me. I mean, we were overtired and we didn't sleep and all that. And it was the only nightmare I've ever had in my life was the first night I spent in Vienna. The Nazis were getting me. They got me. It's the only nightmare I've ever had. It's unbelievable. It's just amazing.
Did you visit any of the camps when you were in here?
No. I wanted to go to Westerbork. And the first day we were in Amsterdam, it was a Friday afternoon, and Mary and I stopped in a shop. And unbeknownst to me, it happened to have been a Jewish shopkeeper. Maybe because he had a mezuzah. I knew he was Jewish. So I asked him about going to Westerbork. He says, don't do it. It's a 3-hour bus ride from here. It's in northeast corner, 5 miles from the German border, and the curator may or may not open up the museum for you. Okay. Amsterdam being the wonderful walking city that it is, that evening we stopped in the tourist information center, and there was a girl with a Magen David. So obviously I went over to her, and the first thing the girl said to me is, I have a Jewish boyfriend, but I'm not Jewish. Disclaimer, immediately. I guess she was proud of not being Jewish. So I asked her about Westerbork. She gave me the exact same response the shopkeeper did. So no, I didn't go. And I have no interest in going to it. Tell you a story. Mary and I were in Versailles years later, and I went to get her something to eat, and she's sitting on the bench. Someone stopped and said, could I sit next to you? You know, my wife said, absolutely. He happened to have been a minister from Christchurch, New Zealand, who had just retired, and he was traveling Europe, living in other people's homes, and they would live in his house. You know, they exchanged. So he said to me, I just came back from Auschwitz, visiting Auschwitz. I said, well, I have no need to do that since I was born in a concentration camp. And there's a woman online who points to her husband. See him? He is a DP person. He was born in 1946 in Germany. So it's such a small world. It's just a small world. But for years and years and years, I refused to go to Germany. I absolutely never want to go to Germany. And we took a cruise out of Copenhagen, doing the Baltic Sea. And the first stop happened to be a city called Rostock, Germany. And we got off the ship, we went into the store to get euros, took the bus into town, and without me even realizing, the anxiety level was up to my nose. And I was nasty to our friend, I was nasty to my wife. I didn't even realize what was happening to me, but the anxiety in my body was so strong, I couldn't wait to get out of Germany. And I will never, ever go back, ever.
Were your parents religious? Do you know before?
Well, my grandparents were religious on both sides of my family. My father went to yeshiva till he was 19. My father could have, if you know what semicha is, that's what a rabbi, in order to become a rabbi, you have to have semicha. So he could have become a rabbi anytime he wanted. He chose not to be religious, and he met my mother, who came from an Orthodox family, and she chose not to be religious. And that was one of the things that brought them together. He was 9 years older than she was. The fact that neither one wanted to be religious.
What about once you immigrated here, was there religion practiced at home?
My father went to synagogue just about every Saturday, but no. And I went to yeshiva for 8 years, and the answer is no. But he loved the culture. He loved going to synagogue. And for me, putting on a tallis, I can't do it because it's being hypocritical. Because if you know what tzitzis are, I wore tzitzis for 8 years, well, 6 years, 8, maybe 8, all the time I was in yeshiva. And it's the height of hypocrisy to me. Absolute height of hypocrisy for me, who is not religious. And that's how I feel about it. I can't put a tallis on. I don't go to synagogue, except on Yom Kippur for Yiska for my parents and my brothers. Other than that, no. But I'm lucky. All four of our children married Jewish, either, well, my stepdaughter married two Jewish men. One, her first husband died, and our three sons all married Jewish women. And our grandchildren have been brought up Jewish. They all had bar mitzvahs.
I think their children are more religious than.
No, but culturally, which is important to me, that they all follow it, and they feel strong being Jewish. Strong Jewish feelings. As strong as that generation can feel, I suppose.
When did you start talking about the Holocaust in your experience?
My first wife didn't want to hear a word about it. My mother would talk to me a lot about it. My total view of the Holocaust is through my mother's eyes. And now, you mean in my adult life? Well, when I met my second wife, and 4 weeks later, we started living together, and my birthday was a week later, and the present she bought me was a book called Giselle Saved the Children, about an Auschwitz survivor. So going from a woman who had absolutely no interest to one that cared about my feelings, that helped, I would say after I was 40.
Did you talk to your children about it? Did they always know?
My children, I don't talk much about that. They know my experience. My grandchildren, when they've done Holocaust, they call me. One of the few times they call me. but yes, in that case, other people have asked me to speak to youth group, which I've done. You know what? I'm proud of my. I'm proud that I'm a survivor, that my family survived. I'm proud of it. I'm proud of my mother that put 3 kids through that. And the older I get, the more I understand why my mother was the way she was. And my father. I've forgiven my father for a lot of things because of, he was a very quiet man. He didn't participate with the family. But because that was the way but also somewhere or another he got the message that those were my mother's children. Those were my mother's children. And he had very little to say on how we were raised or whatever. I think there was a sublime message on her part to him. Maybe she was angry at him. I don't know. But there was definitely a message there.
Do you know about
Does that make sense?
Sure, of course, yeah. It's of course so unusual that you were actually born in a camp.
Very. I've never met anybody like me, ever. Have you?
No.
Have you heard of?
Only DP camps.
Oh, DP camps, I know people.
Okay.
Yeah, but there's a big difference between a DP camp and I don't do Facebook. But I'd like my wife to put on Facebook that I'm looking for other Westerbork survivors. And I'm sure there are some. But interesting story. My son, who owns several sleepaway camps, was talking to this real estate fella about buying another camp or, getting involved with another camp. His name is Olaf. I forgot his last name. And they were talking, and Olaf told him that he was born in the Netherlands in 1941. He didn't go to Westerbork. He was hidden, whatever, I don't remember. But my son put me in touch with him. And I spoke to him. He says, shit, I wanted to be the youngest person. So that was his first thought. He wanted to be the youngest.
You win.
I don't know he wasn't in the concentration camp. Somehow or another he survived, and maybe he was hidden, I don't know.
And how long was your family there in Westerbork?
My father was there early part of 39. My mother was there mid 39.
And the family came together. They were allowed to be the two children.
They lived together. And with the two kids, yeah, it was detention camp. My parents were part of the infrastructure of the camp. I don't know what they did, but my father was part of the infrastructure. And yeah, the Dutch allowed the refugees to live together, and the Germans just accepted the way it was. There was no reason for them. They utilized it as a transportation camp. Prior to that, it was detention camp, just centralizing the refugee Jews from Western Europe, or wherever they came from. My parents came from Central Europe.
So there was adequate food and medical attention there that she was...
Yeah, I had double pneumonia. I was in the hospital. I was circumcised. I had a mohel. In fact, I had a godmother. The husband was the rabbi in Moyle for Westerbork. And for many years, she lived on 59th and Central Park. She was, what do you call it? She lived with older people. She took care of them. I forgot what you call her. I don't think she was an aide, but not a nanny because it was older people. You know what?
Fair, but for
Yeah.
Did you see her then? Were you?
Sure. Yes, we did. Not that often, but yes, we did.
So
It was Westerbork survivors. It was like I remember one other person that I met who was a Westerbork survivor that was friends with my parents. His name was Pinkowitz. I don't remember. Oh, Theo Pinkowitz. And he had a son. But he was born after the war.
Did your brothers talk about?
Not to me.
Because they were older then, right? So.
Yeah. My brother Dutchie, he was called Dutchie when we arrived in the United States, Bernard. No, we didn't. Well, I had nothing to share with them. I personally, I could only listen, but I had nothing to share. And Dutchie always lived his life saying he beat Hitler. And unfortunately, in my estimation, he did not. He was brilliant. I mean, he passed a test for Brooklyn Tech. He had no formal education for 5 years when he was in Westerbork and Ravensbrück and Bergen-Belsen. And he passed the test for Brooklyn Tech without even speaking English. Just about. He barely spoke English. And my brother Marcel hated my parents and hated me. Hated my parents because he was in the concentration camp. And he hated me because I displaced him as the youngest. and that my mother gave me more energy than she had to give him. And he never forgave me, and he never forgave my parents. And Marcel became a multimillionaire. He was an attorney, and unfortunately, he died at 58 because of all his anger. He had tremendous anger issues.
Did you all identify as being Holocaust survivors? Was that one of the things of,
Nothing united us. But nothing united us, no. But my mother wanted to be the sun and everybody rotate around her. So she had no interest in having the kids be close with each other. She didn't teach us that. Maybe because she didn't feel that way about her siblings. But all I could tell you is my two children, they bought houses back to back. Because and my ex-wife, their mother, is an only child who has no idea about siblings. But I told my kids from the day they were born how important they are to each other. Your mother and I will not be here forever, but the two of you will be. And they bought back-to-back houses. So that tells you something.
Later on, did you start researching the Holocaust and learning more about what happened in other places?
I brought in a book, all the...
The atlases, yeah, right?
Right. So that was 25, 30 years ago. I'd gone to the Holocaust Museum in Washington when it was first built. And I was an invited guest of the Holocaust Museum, their 20th anniversary, because they invited all survivors and World War II people who were in the Army during World War II, veterans of World War II. And I was an invited guest. I had to pay $50 for my wife to go to the dinner. And if I invited any other guests, it would be $250. So it was a fundraiser for them. But Elie Wiesel spoke, and Elie Wiesel attacked President Roosevelt for not doing anything for the European Jews during World War II. And Bill Clinton was there, because Bill Clinton was president when the Holocaust Museum opened up. Clinton spoke Monday morning. And for a president not to attack Wiesel about what he said about Roosevelt, but there was a message there. And what Clinton did say, he's a beautiful speaker, that he points to Elie Wiesel and he says, he's my friend, and because of him, I went into Kosovo. I could not allow the genocide occurring in Kosovo. So he gave all the credit to Wiesel for his actions. I don't know if I answered your question.
Sure. One of the questions we usually ask is if the Holocaust changed what you thought of humanity, but having been born during the Holocaust, you didn't have that sense before.
No.
Has your sense of humanity, has it changed at all, over time as you grew up?
Well, I'm having a very difficult problem the last 3 years because of the president we have. And I see how the country is moving towards the right, towards anti-Semitism, anti-black, anti-everything. Yeah, I have to say in the last 3 years, yes, it pisses me off terribly. Yeah, I'm very upset with humanity today, yes.
What do you think people can do to fight the anti-Semitism and the racism?
Well, number one, get rid of this president. because it stems from the top. There's no question about it. There's absolutely no question about it. Get rid of all these fucking guns. And excuse my language, but I mean, there are lots of things we could do. But I think first thing is to vote out this president. I have very strong feelings about that.
I think we have to.
No, some people love him. But then obviously, they don't care about his character, and they don't care about anti-Semitism. They think he's for the Jews. Well, you better scratch the goddamn surface and really see what's going on. And he's anti-Muslim, he's anti-black, he's anti-everything. And how could you vote for somebody like that?
So hopefully, let's say, students can watch this video and they can hear your story. What do you want people to remember about you and about your experience?
Me personally, love life, enjoy every day, be nice to your neighbor, be nice, be kind. If I had one message I'd like people to do, is to be kind. I think that would be the message.
And then what do you think people can do today to respond to genocide and human rights violations?
There was a book written by Franz Werfel in the 1920s, and it was called 40 Days of Musa Dagh. And the whole book is about the Turkish genocide of the Armenians. And they didn't learn a goddamn thing from that book. Nobody listened, nobody learned. I don't know. It's what you want. It's what you want out of life. It's what you want for yourself. It's what you want for your children. And how your moral fiber is very important. It's your own moral fiber that really regulates how you feel and how you act. And that would help. But how is it going to happen with this president? It's not. He has no morals. Where are they going to acquire it from? Home, I hope. Parents, I hope.
Did you experience any anti-Semitism
Yeah.
in your childhood here?
Well, my first attempt at a good job, I did, yes. Absolutely. I was interviewed by Phillips Norelco, and I felt I didn't get the job because I was Jewish, yes.
Do you know how you got from camp to camp?
Yeah. The Netherlands Railroad transported me from Westerbork to Ravensbrück. That's why I just received a payment of 15,000 euros. That I know.
How were you able to prove that in order to get the restitution?
I didn't have to. They know years ago I received a small reparations from the Dutch government. So I was on file having been born in Westerbork. They know I went to Ravensbrück and Bergen-Belsen, so they knew they were the ones who transported me. I had no problem with documentation.
So that incriminated the train system because that was the
Yeah.
only way.
That was the only way.
And then with the documents that you brought, there was the one from, was it
El Salvador.
So how did that come into play?
Interesting. My mother's first cousin lived in Switzerland, and she was in charge of the visa stamp. She was an attorney working in the office. She held the stamp, and the reason why she didn't get us to Switzerland is because she didn't want to be financially responsible for us. She had the ability to save our lives, and she didn't do it. But she did get them the El Salvador. Germans didn't allow us to do it, to use it. That's December 20th, 1943. The Germans wouldn't allow us to go to El Salvador. They didn't let the Jews out anymore.
But so then your parents, your mother kept the document?
I can't answer. I don't know. I don't know how I have the ability to make a copy of that. I can't tell you. I don't know.
And your birth certificate?
Well, that we applied to Westerbork, Holland, and they,
You applied and they were.
yeah. Germans kept great records. So that was available. But I shouldn't, the Dutch kept good records. No, I was born under Germany, right. The German occupation. So it was the Germans.
Is there any other, details or bits of anything that you will?
I think I anecdotal pretty well.
Yes, of course you did.
Is that a word, anecdotal?
Sure.
For someone who has no memory, I could talk.
Well, I mean, it's pretty amazing because you were so young when everything.
It's amazing I survived. That's the amazing part. That my brothers survived. That my parents survived.
Does it make you feel like you were born for a purpose because you were able to?
You know, it's funny you asked that question, and I'm glad you asked that question. My first 40 years of my life, I had a guilt complex that I survived. And why did I survive? So in many ways, that feeling had me do many things for many people under that flag. And then when I met my second wife, I said, and I went through therapy, I said, I don't have to feel this burden. I didn't ask for the burden. It's no longer a burden. But I still do all those nice things for other people. So it wasn't the burden. I could take credit for that's me and my being. Because my ex-wife would always say to me, why did you do that for that person? And I said, you'll never understand. You just won't understand, so how could I explain it to you? Mary never asked me that question, because she's the same way. She would say, why didn't you do that for that person, instead of why did you do that for that person? Two different ways of, two different important people in my life coming at me different ways.
Did your wife, did she have any family in the Holocaust?
Mary or my first wife?
Mary.
No,
She still
not that we
got it.
know.
She understood.
Yeah, she's third generation American, so no, she didn't.
That's even more beautiful that she was encouraged.
It's just the kind of person she is. That's why we're together,
Yeah.
and that's why I'm not with.
That's right. What about, do you think your brothers or your parents lived their life in that way? Not with the guilt, but with a need to help or?
No. But they were, it's different. It's different. Different energies, different angers, different, I mean, my father came to the United States. He did speak English. He self-taught. My father was very good with languages. Try to make a living for his family. That was his responsibility. And my mother, she didn't like people. She didn't trust people. She had great difficulty with relationships. No. But it's not where they would detract from me doing it. And my brothers weren't that way either. None of my brothers were that way. No. In fact, my brother Marcel, I mean, he bought an apartment in Great Neck. My parents lived in the apartment. He charged them rent, the full amount. He was a multimillionaire. And whatever capitalization he had to do, they paid for it. But he would tell me what a wonderful, you know, how wonderful he is that they live in his apartment. You don't want to hear what I said. His second wife would say to me, oh, no, I can't, what did she say? I'll think of it. Why don't you respect? Why don't you show respect? Because he's a multimillionaire, you should show him respect. I said, when he earns it, I will give it to him. He didn't like me. And that's the truth. He'd never earned it.
So you started coming to our group within the last year or so.
The last 3-4 months.
Were there any other times where you were, aside from the celebration when USH like first started, were you around other Holocaust survivors?
No. No. I don't know too many I don't know any Holocaust survivors. Except maybe the one that I met here.
Right. Ellen, right? Yeah.
No, Ellen's not a survivor.
Ellen.
No, she's not a survivor. She's a Kindertransport, but she was in England.
Right.
So was Anita.
Right.
Rosetta was in France. I don't know her, but what's his name? The fella.
Gabor.
Yeah, he and I survived this, were liberated from the same camp.
That's right.
From Bergen-Belsen. Funny story. Funny. I had a friend of mine. She was born in the DP camp, south of Munich, a little north of Switzerland. And she and I joined a second generation in 1981 group that my ex-wife got me involved with. And we did that group together, and we were friends for years. We stopped being friends. And her daughter writes on Facebook that her grandma survived Bergen-Belsen. I call Eileen up. I said, Eileen, I don't understand. I know you since 1970, and you never once told me that your mother was liberated from Bergen-Belsen, and I guess I never told you I was liberated, because it was just amazing to me that here, I know since 1970, we did Children of Survivors together, and it never came up. Just never came up.
But both of you didn't tell her and she didn't tell you?
Exactly. It just, we didn't connect the two, the dots.
Did you know like her mother's story though? Because
No, if I did, I would have known I knew her parents met in a DP camp. I knew both her parents survived the concentration camp. Never asked her which one. Never, I guess. But, you know, the museums do not evoke emotion out of me, but memorials do. The one in Miami Beach, they have a memorial. I walk through there, I just cry. Maybe because they have the names of all the concentration camps I was in. And Boston has done a very nice job, their memorial. They did a nice job. Every name of who died, they have. They did it in very small, but it's unbelievable. I think I told you this story, that I'm in Yad Vashem, and they have this room where you inquire about concentration camp. So I went there and I said, Neufeld, Bergen-Belsen. He looks it up, he says, I don't have any Neufelds, Bergen-Belsen. I said, gee, I was liberated from there. He says, that's why. We only have the dead. Said, I'm glad I'm not on your list. Said, I'm glad I missed that list.
Well, so to that effect then, the last year, I guess, is with this exhibit that we're planning on doing, what do you think that we can do where it would be emotionally moving for you, like at walking through being a survivor?
It's a good question. The names of the concentration camps always get me. And I don't know. I found the Auschwitz exhibit sterile, for me. Other people said, that they felt, for me, maybe because I've been to Yad Vashem, I've been to Washington, D.C. Maybe because of that, I can't. And Auschwitz just doesn't do it for me. Maybe because they're dead people. I don't know. I can't answer. I don't know. I've been emotional through, parts of this. It depends. I can't answer. I don't know.
All right, but definitely.
Is it important to get people to emote, or is it important for people to understand what happened and not allow it to happen again? That's what's important. They don't have to emote. Do you think they should emote?
I mean, not necessarily. I think sometimes, especially for like students that feel so removed from it, if you're able to tell a personal story and that makes them feel connected and they have that emotional response, then they absorb all the information in a different way. And that, it doesn't work for everyone, but sometimes. That's the thing I think I'm struggling with this next exhibit, that it's just facts, because you need the personal stories.
But that's what was the Auschwitz, just facts. That's how I felt.
Because then you can remove yourself from it and you just see statistics. But when it's a person's story and a person's face, then it's like, this could have been me.
Well, it was me. But I could laugh about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but as I forgot your name?
Sean.
As I was telling Sean, me growing up, I had a great advantage over most people connected with the Holocaust. Certainly, in my estimation, children who were born after the war and who had parents who were survivors, the surviving parents, in some case, or very frequently, put such guilt trips on their children. How could you do that to me? I survived the concentration camp. My parents never did that to my younger brother, but they couldn't do it to me. I survived. I was there. Hey, don't give me your shit. I was there. I had my own. So in that respect, I had a great advantage over.
They had another baby after you?
I had a brother who was born in 1948. We arrived in June, he was born in March. So you figure it out. I was the child that wasn't planned. He was the child that was planned. Because guaranteed, I wasn't planned. That I can guarantee you. Why would anybody put their kid in that situation?
But who knows, you might have saved them because they gave your mother, more strength. She had to fight harder to protect her.
Yeah, she had 2 other kids. She would fight hard for them, too. My mother was a powerhouse. She was a powerhouse. And that's why we survived. And my father, because I told you, He went to yeshiva all those years. He survived Buchenwald because he studied the Gemara in his head every single day that he was there. And he took himself out of his situation by studying in his head.
Did he talk about his experience?
Never. Not to me. And I don't think to my brothers. No, he didn't share well.
But he told you that he said prayers?
No. When Rabbi Lerner did the eulogy for my father, Rabbi Lerner from the Young Israel in Great Neck, my father studied with him every Saturday the Gemara, and he told that at his eulogy, and that's how I found out.
Well, that's beautiful that's what, that the religion was the thing that put him there, and that's the thing that saved him.
Culture, religion, studying. My father was he was good with a book. Very good. Good with languages. That's it. Did I do okay?
I think you did great.
I hope so.